I know that I come after 2.5 stimulating days, but I will try to engage you a bit more on some forward looking also, well, going back into what has happened up until now, but also with some forward looking plans of the EU on the development of talent partnerships. So we will very much be focused on the external dimension of the migration policy, and on these new policy ideas on how to enhance access to the national labor markets while also ensuring co-development. So a brief outline of what this presentation will include. I know, and I have seen from the Who is Who, that this is a very expert audience, but I will just pass through you extremely briefly through the legal and policy background in this area, and then the main focus of the presentation will be insights into the talent partnerships as envisaged by the European Commission and their nature as comprehensive cooperation frameworks, and then going a bit more into the nitty-gritty of how talent partnerships could be operationalized and what this would mean in practice in terms of their effectiveness, efficiencies, and also links with fundamental rights. And then we will conclude, of course, with your questions and observations. So as I said, we will pass very briefly through this, but just to say that, as you are well aware, the Lisbon Treaty includes an explicit legal basis on the external dimension, which is more focused on the issue of readmission and readmission agreements. But that, of course, does not exclude the EU's powers and competences in the external dimension through the so-called implied powers doctrine, so that it is possible also to conclude international agreements where it is necessary for the pursuance of one of the objectives referred to in the treaties, and so the entire then internal spectrum, let's say, becomes relevant also in the external dimension. But in the area that we will be focusing on, which is also access to legal migration opportunities and to the labor markets, it is very important to remind ourselves of the limitation which is included within the Lisbon Treaty, and actually the fact that the volumes of admission remain an exclusive member state competence. And this is not a point also of theoretical value. This will be key also, has been key in the operationalization of other schemes, and will be key in the operationalization of the talent partnerships. So very briefly again, because this is a learned audience, there has been throughout the policy development of the different stages, there has been attention also paid to the external dimension, starting already from the Tampere conclusions and the ambitions for this policy area, which included already a comprehensive approach to migration and linked migration with development. Then after a period, let's say, of closure that was also linked with the 9/11 events, we had a more balanced framework through the adoption of the so-called global approach to migration that was further developed in 2012 into the global approach to migration and mobility as this overarching political framework for cooperation with third countries, which combined, if you want, different goals, such as fighting irregular migration, but also facilitating mobility, promoting legal migration opportunities, again, including this nexus between migration and development, and also including explicitly cooperation on asylum and international protection. The next stage in the policy development was 2015, 2016, and of course, you are aware that there were a number of policy initiatives that were adopted at this point as a response also to the increased arrivals of those fleeing armed conflict in Syria. And this was reflected also in the external dimension with the so-called new partnership framework that supplements rather than replaces the global approach to migration and mobility. And what was inserted has been this explicit emphasis on preventing and combating irregular migration to the EU, and this, in a spirit of conditionality, has been streamlined into the cooperation with third countries. And as we will see, this vision of conditionality survives also with the current developments, which are the talent partnerships. In terms of what kind of instruments have so far been adopted as part of the external dimension of migration, we have had some quote unquote hard law, so legally binding instruments, such as, for example, a number of readmission agreements or visa facilitation agreements. But we also had a predominance of soft law instruments and soft cooperation processes, and the talent partnerships come within this same trajectory. Some examples were the mobility, so-called mobility partnerships, which included commitments on future, if you want, visa facilitation, financing cooperation, and also incorporated opportunities for labor migration. So the talent partnerships come within and follow this long trajectory and experience of soft cooperation framework, if you will, rather than legally binding agreements. And just to say that where we set off today is that the existing frameworks so far have led to a paucity of labor mobility opportunities, while the financing volume, for example, has been significant and has expanded. The labor mobility per se opportunities have remained limited. I'm not going to read out the slide, but here you will have among your material the example of Morocco and how, for example, the conclusion of this soft cooperation framework, the mobility partnership, has not translated in practice, if you want, into a significant increase, let's say, in labor mobility opportunities. And then there have been a number of pilot projects that have been launched under the mobility partnership framework. And while in themselves they have been, as you see, ad hoc and small scale, they include, if you want, the seeds for further development, for the scaling up through the talent partnerships. So some of this joint approach on co-development and on creation of education and vocational training opportunities in the countries of origin have already been inserted in this pilot projects. The first generation has been concluded at this point. There is the second generation that is being ongoing. So while they may not seem numerically significant, they have been significant in the terms of the philosophy that they included. So this was very briefly the background, and now we come into the main chunk and the main gist of the presentation, which is current reality and forward-looking assessment of the talent partnerships. And I am drawing in my presentation also from two documents that are included in your material. The one is a study that was delivered to the EP Libe committee this December, that is co-authored together with further colleagues from the Odysseus Academic Network. And it covers also other elements of the legal migration package that you have been examining in these 2 days, but it also has a specific section dedicated on the talent partnerships. And the other is a discussion paper co-authored, very recent, for the European Policy Center, which examines more broadly funding in the EU's external migration policy, and through this lens also includes a policy assessment and some policy recommendation on the operationalization of the talent partnerships. So you can find fuller details also within these two documents. But we are also going to scrutinize talent partnerships together. So what are these talent partnerships? What's in a name? So this is a policy vision that was launched by the European Commission within the new Pact on Migration and Asylum, but it was more fully fleshed out in a Commission communication of April 2022 on attracting skills and talent, which other colleagues may have referred as to its internal dimension, and which is also included in your material. So what they are is in essence soft cooperation frameworks, so policy cooperation and funding frameworks that are to bring together a third country, the EU, interested member states, and the private sector. And why do I mention the EU and member states separately? It is in fact this limitation that we mentioned within the treaties and how competences at the EU level are structured. It is in fact up to the member states. It is only the member states that can commit to a specific volume, if you want, of admission, so that they can very practically open their labor markets and make available, make commitments on specific numbers of third country nationals that can be included. And that's why the EU has, if you want, a coordinating role, and also can support the financial component of the talent partnerships. But in what concerns specifically legal access, so entry to the national labor markets, it is the member states, the specific member states, so it is on a voluntary, of course, basis, that will join this cooperation framework, that can commit on these elements. And they are comprehensive on 3 levels, and I'm just mentioning it briefly here, but then we will go in depth. So the comprehensiveness extends on their scope, on the variety of stakeholders that are involved in their operationalization and design, and also in their extensive goals. So going a bit more in depth in each of these elements. As to their scope, they echo very much the policy idea of the global skills partnerships that has been developed as part of the Global Compact on Migration. So they combine labor mobility opportunities to the EU with capacity building and investment in human capital components in the partner third country. And what do I mean very practically by this? I mean education and vocational training opportunities in the third country, where those that will benefit, a part of those third country nationals may enter the EU labor market, but some will enter the national labor market in the third country. So this is why I am referring also to the term of co-development. So there is to be a dedicated education, if you want, and vocational training component that will not be only instrumental towards migration into the EU and benefit the EU labor market, but there will be these skills and capacity development that will benefit the third country labor market. And they are also comprehensive in another sense. So far, the existing labor mobility opportunities to their and these pilot projects, to their grand extent, so not exclusively, but to a grand extent, have largely focused on the highly skilled. It is the ambition of the Commission that the talent partnerships will, of course, incorporate, but will not be limited to highly skilled workers, so that they will include opportunities, and they will also target medium and low skilled workers. In terms of them being comprehensive as to their stakeholders, I of course already mentioned the EU and the member states, but there is also a distinct ambition to actively involve private stakeholders in their design, operationalization, and financing components. So also to bring money from the private sector in these components which I mentioned, which is, for example, investment in education and training in the third countries. So I am referring into private stakeholders broadly, looking into, of course, industry and employers, but also providers of trainings, other training and education and vocational education institutions, and diaspora organizations. As to the breadth of their goals, the Commission has adopted and wishes to adopt the so-called whole of government approach, which means that this will be a broad collaborative framework that will bring different issues on the table. So it is going to link external relations and including migration management objectives with education, training, and mobility opportunities to which I previously referred. So this spirit of conditionality that has emerged, especially after 2016, is for the moment quite present also within the policy design of the talent partnerships, which are, and here I'm quoting from the Commission communication, to engage key partner countries strategically in all areas and elements such as migration management, including return and readmission, as well as prevention of irregular departures, are mentioned there. So, and here to see this visually, I have borrowed actually an element from our 2022 EP LIBE study. This outlines the different stakeholders, but also their differential interests. So as you can see, there is also here, of course, the potential for some, if you will, conflict, or at least there is some underlying tensions. So we have the countries of origin that, of course, are interested in the funding components, in the development, including a local development, so brain gain, but also into the legal pathways for their nationals, and potentially for protected persons in their territories, we will come back to this point, to enter into the EU. We then have the EU and the member states that are also interested in conditionality and in achieving these migration management objectives. But of course, on the other hand, there is the need to fill skill shortages in national labor markets in the EU. We have the employers, the private sector interests, which are, of course, very much focused into these filling gaps in the labor market. And in this, they also want a facility in the recognition of qualifications of the third country nationals, and a facility in matching, if you want, needs that they have with existing capacities. And then there is the migrant interest in training, in also mobility opportunities into the EU. And also this could include, and that is the Commission's vision, that this could include rights and mobility opportunities for those internationally protected in third countries, which of course comes with its own legal complexities. So in terms of their operationalization, as I mentioned, these are meant to be soft cooperation frameworks. So we are not talking about the conclusion of a legally binding instrument, but rather we are talking about a series of consultations between EU institutions, member states, and third country delegations, as well as the private sector. So the Commission envisages that the private sector will already be involved at the level of the design of the partnerships and not only at the level of the operationalization, which basically, given the breadth of their goals, will include both the identification of labor market interests and interests on labor mobility and talent development, but more broadly, as I mentioned, this whole of government approach and conditionalities, the overall state of external relations and migration management needs. And as to their financing, especially if they are to be of a grander scale than these ad hoc projects, pilot projects that have taken place, financing from different sources has to come together. So both from the EU and the development and international cooperation funding, so the new NDICI, or the AMIF, the Asylum, Migration and Integration Funds, member states on funds, so that I mean beyond the one that animates the EU budget, as well as the private sector. So I mentioned that the private sector is to be there at design, operationalization, and financing level. So quite an ambitious also vision on the participation of the private sector. So they are to build in this experience of the smaller scale pilots, but we, as we will also discuss together, if they are to be effective, we are talking of a completely different scale of ambition. As priority countries, the EU has identified Egypt, Morocco, and Tunisia, but of course the future ambition is to make this a comprehensive framework also as to the third countries that will be involved. I mentioned that it is also into the interests of the private sector that there will be this facility, not only in recognizing qualification, but in matching needs with existing capacities. And in that, this initiative is also coupled with the talent pool, which is essentially a matching platform where third country nationals from countries that would participate in the talent partnership would express their interests and upload their qualifications, and where employers and national administrations would have access in order to be able to make a match. I saw that in the program you also spoke into the labor market integration of those fleeing temporary protection in Ukraine. There is in fact a pilot phase for this talent pool, for this matching platform, with 7 member states participating. So the pilot phase has included actually those who are within the EU territory and who benefit from temporary protection. But in the future, it is meant to be much more extensive and to include third country nationals before pre-entry, let's say, who would be nationals of countries or those who have found protection, depending on the scope of the scheme, who have found protection in third countries, in order for them to be quote unquote matched. So going even more into the nitty-gritty, into some operationalization considerations. So I have mentioned the issue of competence distribution and the diverging. So some are, let's say, some needs and some interests aligned, but in some dimensions, there is also the potential there for conflict. But if they are to be, if you want, meaningful and sustainable, then talent partnerships will first of all need to significantly be scaled up in comparison to existing skills. Their duration is, as envisaged by the Commission, is a factor that actually points to that direction. So the current pilots were ad hoc to the extent of maybe 2 years, 18 months. So this was, of course, in terms also of their operationalization. For example, some of them were launched during COVID, then there was the pandemic, and then it was not possible for this reason alone to realize some of the mobility opportunities. So this will be longer term cooperation and sustainable cooperation frameworks, which of course, other than their duration, their effectiveness will depend on the level of participation. So how many member states will be convinced to join a specific talent partnership. The pilots were often bilateral, and that, of course, as you can imagine, limits also the numbers of positions that can be made available for access to the labor market. Then the level of financing. So will we have an effective buy-in, not from the EU and member states, but also from the private sector? And will the member states open officially their labor markets, not only to the highly skilled, but also to medium and so-called low-skilled workers? Another element that affects their effectiveness is conditionalities. And here, of course, you understand very quickly that there is a potential for divergence, not only between migrants and member states' interests, but also private sector interests. So if the private sector is called to fund also these schemes and to contribute into vocational training, for example, in the country of origin, of course, they do this with the expectation that then at least part of some of these skilled workers will join the national labor market and will fill the national labor market in the EU, I mean, and will fill some of these shortages. If, though, at the moment of effective operationalization of this mobility, for example, a conditionality framework is triggered because the third country is not performing on issues of readmission, all of this will be put to a halt, which we can see very quickly that this is a risk that the private sector will probably not be willing to shoulder. So this, their effectiveness, as I said, is impacted by this complex setup and by the costs. When we are talking on efficiencies, we also, apart from the material aspects, we talk about some of the procedural aspects, and here my presentation draws from some of the recommendations that we developed for the European Parliament. So we spoke of the existence of a national contact point with a coordinating function, given the number of ministries and stakeholders at national level that are to take part in order for a talent partnership to be operationalized. We suggested, and we are aware that this has actually been taken up, the adoption and notification of the decision in a shorter deadline within the single permit directive to make this a bit more attractive. We, of course, spoke of the development and operationalization of the talent pool, but also of the revision of the recognition of qualifications framework, so that this will become, the absorption in EU labor markets will become much easier. And a final point before we go to the questions is, of course, that talent partnerships interlink with other existing frameworks, not only those on legal migration, but also those on EU asylum and return. So if third country nationals who are in need of international protection come in through the talent partnerships, and this is a point that the Commission has left actually open, and it is inciting member states also to include such possibilities. Of course, this brings within it legal also obligations in relation to the situation of these individuals, for example, through the principle of non-refoulement. So perhaps they enter on a labor pathway, but they continue also to be refugees and to benefit from the related framework. The other complication, but that is quite specific, is that of surplus claims, that of course any third country national that enters in the future, should the situation in the country of origin shifts, think of, for example, Syria in 2009 and Syria in 2012, this of course alters their legal position. So there is an intricate, if you want, interplay between, when we're talking about specifically protection seekers, there is an intricate interplay with other legal frameworks that we should keep in mind. So I finish here my presentation, and I look forward to your comments and to our discussions.